I'll do a couple of slides just to introduce the panel and set the scene for the discussion that we're going to have. And then I'm going to invite my esteemed panel members to the stage, and we'll have a bit of a discussion really exploring the airport developments and the infrastructure developments that are going on in the countries that they represent. Just to get started, as I said, setting the scene, what drives infrastructure development is, of course, traffic. If we don't have the infrastructure, we can't have the traffic. If the traffic is growing, we need to develop our infrastructure. So what has traffic been looking like? This slide, taken from the latest ACI, Airports Council International Traffic Report, shows you very clearly what's been happening in the world. Very, very strong growth in passenger traffic. The red bars show the total number. You see in 2016, the total number was 7.7 billion passengers. That's a massive number of people flying around the world. The blue line that you see there is the growth. What you can see is that for the last few years, growth has been in the region of 4, 5, 6%, even more than 6% per year. Now that, on a worldwide scale, on a number of 7 billion or almost 8 billion passengers is a huge amount of growth, which obviously drives a huge amount of infrastructure development. If we break that down a little bit further, we've gotten some great stats also from our colleagues at Forward Keys earlier, just before the conference, and I believe they'll be speaking again to dive a bit more into this. But this gives you a little snapshot of the growth in traffic over the last year, from 2015 to 2016, for the different regions. Now, obviously, it's Asia Pacific and the Middle East that jump out here as really, really strong growing regions, and Africa doesn't seem to be growing that strongly. However, if we take a bit of a longer-term view, infrastructure development is very much a long-term game. So when we look at the average annual growth for about the last 6 years, from 2010 to 2016, we see that these growth figures are a bit more normalized, and that even Africa is performing quite well, with an average annual growth of 2%. So that means every year, passengers, on average, are growing by 2%. That means infrastructure in the continent will have to keep up with that growth. And infrastructure, as we know, takes a long time to develop. So you can't wait. You have to invest now in infrastructure to accommodate this growth. Breaking it down a little bit further, the total figure that we got to for Africa last year was 182 million passengers. That's around the population of Nigeria. That's quite a number of people flying around the continent. So when we look at some of the figures, what we've done here, it seems like some of the details from the slide have fallen off, but what I've done here on this graph is to set out income, GDP per capita, versus passenger traffic. So what you see on the horizontal axis is GDP per capita. So these are income levels in Africa. So the ones furthest on the right, you'll see a few labels there. Some of them have fallen off, but countries like Botswana, Gabon, they have relatively high income per capita, but they're very, very small countries. The size of the bubble on this graph represents the population size of the country. So they are very small countries with a relatively high income per capita. What you see on the left is where most of the African countries are stuck together, which is relatively low income per capita. What you see on the vertical axis is the total passenger traffic in the country. So what you see there very clearly is that the bigger countries, the top one there is actually South Africa. So you see South Africa, Egypt, the red one is Morocco, the big blue one is Nigeria. So those are some of the biggest economies on the continent. They obviously also have some of the highest passenger traffic. So what you see here is very much a trend that says if you're bigger, you have more air traffic, but also if you're richer, higher income, higher GDP, you also have more traffic. So this is how it currently stands. So you see very clearly which countries are far ahead of the pack, and you see that a lot of African countries are still with relatively low GDPs and relatively low passenger traffic. But now when we look at growth, the picture changes all of a sudden. So this is the average annual growth for the last 10 years, 2006 to 2016. Again, in GDP on the horizontal axis, so the countries furthest to the right are growing the fastest in terms of their income. On the vertical axis, we have the growth in passenger traffic. So the countries higher up are growing faster in their passenger traffic. So what we see here, again, is a very strong correlation between growth in GDP and growth in passenger traffic. And what we see here is all of a sudden Ethiopia is shooting out to be the star of the continent. It's been mentioned a few times already this morning. It is obviously quite one of the success stories of African aviation. A few of the other countries that jump out are also Ghana. It's a pity that the labels have fallen off because Rwanda is actually the orange one sort of in between Ghana and Ethiopia. So it shows that Rwanda has also been doing quite well. We see countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Zambia, Tanzania. They're all growing relatively fast in terms of passenger traffic. So that's to set the scene of where does the need for infrastructure development come from. So now to explore that a little bit further and how the need for infrastructure development has translated into actual projects for increasing airport infrastructure, I'd like to invite to the stage my panel members. So we have from Zimbabwe, Ms. Shamiso Makova. If you would like to join me on the stage, please. From Zambia, we have Mr. Josiah Mvula. Would you like to join me here? And from Rwanda, playing the home game today, we have Colonel Silas Udahemuka, if you would care to join me. So as I mentioned, we talked a little bit about the traffic and the need for infrastructure development in Africa. And what we have today on the panel are representatives of 3 countries that have been, over the past few years, and are currently investing heavily in airport infrastructure. So I'd just like to give each of the panel members an opportunity to touch on some of the projects that are going on in their country or that have been going on in their country for the last few years. And then we'll dive into those a little bit more to explore why they felt the need to develop this infrastructure and how they're doing it. So perhaps we can start with Zimbabwe. Could you tell us a little bit about particularly the Victoria Falls Airport project?
Okay, in 2013, we did embark on a project to expand the Victoria Falls Airport. The passengers, they carried at that time, the airport could handle 300,000 passengers per annum. So we upgraded the infrastructure to handle 1.5 million passengers per annum. Wow. So what we did, but what actually prompted it was an inquiry from various airlines, because we had a short runway, which was about 2.3 kilometers long. So they were requesting just find out if we could construct a longer runway, which we did starting in 2013. We did construct a 4-kilometer long runway, and we did convert and refurbish the old runway into a parallel taxiway. Great. Yes. Then we constructed a new international terminal building. That is, we actually increased our passenger handling capacity to 1.5, so we increased by 1.3 million passengers per annum. With that infrastructure, because we did lengthen our runway, we constructed a new control tower, a new fire station, and various other infrastructure. Like we had to expand the car parking, the water structures, the sewer system. Yes.
That sounds like quite a comprehensive infrastructure development. And I think it's interesting what you mentioned is that one of the things that may have prompted it was actual demands or requests from airlines.
Yes, it was. We did get inquiries from various airlines. Over the years, actually, since we officially commissioned the Victoria Falls Airport development, we've actually had 3 more airlines that have come in. We've got Ethiopian Airlines that started early this year, Kenya Airways, and South African Airways has actually increased and upgraded their equipment from an Airbus A319 to Airbus A330. We have low-cost carrier FastJet that is flying Harare to Vic Falls and Vic Falls to Joburg. Kenya Airways also connects to Cape Town, and Ethiopian Airways connects to Gaborone.
That's great. I think that's a nice opportunity to have to develop the infrastructure, knowing that the demand is already there. Yes. So that takes away some of the risk. Yeah. For the developments in Zambia, we know that you're working on the Lusaka International Airport as well as on a new airport in Copperbelt for Ndola. What was the situation there in terms of demand and expected demand?
Well, thank you very much. The projects were prompted in Lusaka due to increase in demand. Sorry, can you get me? Yes, the projects were prompted due to growing demand in terms of passenger numbers which have grown, and also the number of operators in Lusaka. We are currently taking projects which are costing about $1 billion in Lusaka, in Ndola, Livingstone, and in Fue. In Lusaka, the project involves construction of the new terminal building. This is a 4 million capacity terminal building with about 6 aero bridges. The project also involves a 70-room hotel just opposite the main terminal, plus 30 rooms in transit. The project will involve building a cargo terminal. It also involved building a presidential terminal. As some of the airlines may be aware, right now when the president is landing, operations sort of come to a halt. So we thought of building a terminal separate from him, from the main terminal. In Ndola, we're building a completely new greenfield airport. This has been prompted by the infrastructure that is very old. The airport was built in 1938 during the Second World War. And right now, the length of the runway has got limitations because we've got developments on both sides of the runway. So we're building a completely new greenfield airport that's going to have 3.5-kilometer runway. It's going to be able to land up to 747 aircraft. It's going to have 1 million capacity passenger terminal and all the other ancillary buildings that come with an airport. In Livingstone, we just commissioned a new terminal last year. This was done from internal sources, from the company, and it's been in operation since last year.
Wow, so even 3 airports, substantial new development, substantial capacity increasing. You mentioned 4 million capacity for Lusaka. That's quite a big jump. You mentioned a greenfield airport for Ndola. Obviously, one of the big greenfield airports that everybody's aware of and everybody's talking about is the Bugesera airport here in Rwanda. Colonel Silas, could you tell us a little bit about what prompted the need to upgrade from the current Kigali to the new Bugesera?
Thank you very much. We recognize that Rwanda is landlocked. It's natural and given. We also recognize that Rwanda is centrally located on the continent. And this has driven more than the dream of having the new airport. But the government has identified aviation as a key that will unlock the landlocked country. And the Bugesera project comes into that perspective. We are not only being a very small country, but the terrain of our country is such that we are immensely mountainous with so many undulating landscapes. And we all know the cost of making an airport, by and large, will have a bigger component of soil works. And we also know that the size of our land surface is very small. In the first place, it was very hard to identify a suitable location that would be cost effective in this country. So it's ideal that government secured this land in the first place, which has been secured. And this was being done in preparation for the investments that are going to be done subsequently towards promoting aviation. And the existing airport, Kigali Airport, wasn't going to suffice. First of all, the settlements around the airport are going to be more expensive than acquiring a new greenfield airport. And the government has identified aviation as one of the key flagship projects. And that's how Bugesera New Airport ties into the entire game. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I think it's interesting you mentioned that obviously the airport developments in Rwanda are very much part of a strategy, particularly for a landlocked country. How do you see that in Zambia? Is it also part of a strategy, and how do you position your new airport developments within the competitive environment?
Well, in Zambia, we're hoping that we can turn Zambia into the new hub in the region. We believe that we're a natural hub. We've got 8 countries that are neighbors with Zambia. And the first step we thought is to, first of all, have infrastructure in place, which is what we're doing. And then the next step, obviously, will to have a domiciled airline that's going to distribute passengers around from the region and also connect to Europe and Asia. So also maybe I didn't mention the other reasons why we're developing, particularly in Lusaka. And those of you that have passed through Lusaka, Sometimes you see congestions at the check-in counters, you see congestion at the security screening points, you see congestions at the gates, because we only have 2 gates at the moment. So all that prompted Zambia airports to expand its capacity and just improve the customer experience at the end of the day.
Oh, great. It's good that you touch on that topic. I actually wanted to ask all of you about that. With these airport infrastructure developments, they are driven by capacity. Capacity can be a very technical thing. We do traffic forecasts, we do master plans, we look at square meters, we look at peak hour passengers, we look at all this data. But what it really comes down to is that you want to facilitate travel for passengers, for people. So that's an important element, I think, in successful infrastructure development, is looking at what does it do for the passenger experience. Could you tell us a little bit about how that's been handled in Victoria Falls? How did you take into account the particular type of passengers? I would imagine you get a lot of tourists there. How did that feature into your infrastructure development plans?
Yeah, Victoria Falls, like Livingstone, because they are, it's about 30 minutes drive to the Livingstone airport. It's mostly handles tourists. Right. So we do have tourists that come in, they're mostly seasonal, when around June, July, August, we have the highest, isn't it, around that time. The challenges we have in Victoria Falls is that the terminal building was too small. So you find that when an aircraft or 2 aircraft arrived, you find that the passengers will be queuing outside the terminal building. In Victoria Falls, it's very hot because we're going towards the Botswana, the desert. So it's very, very, very hot. So some of the passengers would be at a case and point at one time someone actually collapsed. Yes. So we had that challenge. And during check-in as well, if we're checking in 3 aircraft, we also have passengers queuing outside the terminal building. We tried to handle that by extending part of the land side bits, but the air side was a bit constrained, could not do anything. Okay. So what we did is we did convert the old domestic terminal, the old terminal, the whole of it, into a domestic terminal. So instead of having, originally we had 3 check-in counters for both international and domestic. Now we have 6 check-in counters for domestic, and we've got 12 check-in counters for international. In terms of immigration, we had about 5 counters for immigration. Now we have 10 counters for immigration. Okay. And we've got a much improved and increased space for handling passengers at both arrivals and departures. So everyone is now contained inside the terminal building. We have also increased our commercial space. We need to make money. We have increased the commercial space. Now instead of having, like for example, food and beverage, we had about 2, a coffee shop and a restaurant. Now we have about 4 restaurants and 2 more coffee shops, about 6 that are operating right now, with some that have submitted their applications. We only had 1 business class lounge. Now we have got 3 for international. We have got 1 for domestic. And in terms of parking, like I said, we now have enough space for parking. So there is a lot of flexibility. Now everyone is free. You don't go around bumping against everyone. Because now we have a lot of space to do that. For the screening areas, we've got, instead of we used to have 2, just 2. 1 for domestic, 1 for international. Now we have got we've got 4 international, and we've got 2 domestic.
Okay. So it sounds like really there's been a huge capacity increase also in the passenger processing facilities, giving more space, reducing queues, I would imagine. But also you mentioned the commercial opportunities, which is a great opportunity for your airport, but it also provides convenience and experience for the passengers.
Yes. With the new terminal building, we now have 3 air bridges. So now we have got 6 boarding gates, 3 air bridges and 3 passing.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you, in terms of when you hear these experiences from a redeveloped or an expanded airport, when you design a greenfield airport, you of course have almost a blank sheet of paper where you can really design the passenger experience. Touching on some of the points that were mentioned, can you elaborate how that was incorporated in the thinking for Bugesera? Are you aiming to achieve a certain level? Are you looking at a particular type of passenger experience this new airport will provide?
We want to take advantage of the fact that it's a greenfield airport. And when you look at the African continent, the last time airports were developed was immediately after independence. And it was not only developed, it was also controlled by the people who are there, the colonialists. It is only now that African governments are developing airports. And it's very obvious, because for airports to beat demand and require for further refurbishment or new developments, it takes quite some time. And it's also it requires heavy capital investment. Nearly 40 airports are being developed on the continent now. And it's about time we developed airports that do not only meet demand, but also that do meet advancements in technology and the service that is required, air service quality. So Bugesera is certainly going to take leverage of that, of the time we lost in developing an adequate airport. So we are not only going to leverage on the new technologies, but we are also going to take advantage of the types of aircraft that are being manufactured today. Because to do an airport, you need to have a critical aircraft. So we are taking advantage of all that.
Okay, that's great. And the developments in Zambia, how much are they driven by purely passenger demand, and how much are they also taking into account the need to drive non-aeronautical revenues? As you mentioned, this is probably one of the first times that a lot of these airports are developed with a more commercial mindset. How is that incorporated in your developments in Zambia?
Well, actually, that's a very important point for us because the ratio between aviation revenue and non-aviation revenue is very aeronautical revenue is about 92% of the total revenue, and only 8% is non-aeronautical. And that is because of the design of the terminal buildings. The design of the old terminal buildings didn't incorporate spaces for shops, for duty-free, and so forth. And also the new terminal is going to be a little bit more flexible. The old terminal was based on brick and mortar. You know, you can't do much with brick and mortar. So yes, the designs that were incorporated the growth of non-aviation. And also, most airports have got vast tracts of land. So we're trying to make sure that we utilize land optimally. We'll be talking to some hoteliers and other people who've got maybe initiatives on how we can utilize the land, and then we can increase activities at the airport. Other than just depending on landings and navigation, aeronautical aviation, as you know, is very susceptible to change. We've been victims several times when there's a financial crisis in the world, when there's outbreak of Ebola. Whatever happens out there has got a direct impact on our income. And since we don't have control over that, it makes it very difficult for us. So non-aviation is probably going to be the savior for the airports.
Okay. Back to Bugesera, you mentioned the vast tracts of land. Obviously, you're developing a greenfield airport, which has quite a bit of space around it. How do you see the development of some of that land? Are there huge commercial opportunities that you as an aviation authority are looking to take advantage of? Or is it something that you might open up to the private sector to get involved with?
The project is a PPP. And the representatives of that joint venture were here this morning. The way we are looking at this investment is an enabler. And we should live and accept the fact that aviation will only give you marginal profits and benefits in terms of business. But we look at it as an enabler. It's an engine that sets other engines of the economy. And it blends in very well with our government strategy of MICE. So we strongly believe this new project will be an impetus to development of other sectors of our economy.
Okay, great. Okay, touching a little bit on the strategy behind the development of these airports and the positioning of these airports. You mentioned already being part of the strategy for Rwanda to connect itself as a landlocked nation. You echoed those sentiments for Zambia, saying you're looking to become a regional hub. I'm sure there are many of your neighbors who have quite the same ambition, so it's going to be an interesting space to watch. Now, with the view on traffic development, what are the types of passengers, and let's start with the Vic Falls then, where it's maybe the most obvious that this is a leisure market, this is a tourism destination. What are the types of passengers and what are the types of markets, what are the types of airlines that you're looking at to fly to this airport?
We have the traditional markets like the American markets, the European markets, the British, but we are targeting the Asian market as well right now because it's the growing market. We are currently working with, in Europe, we are currently targeting airlines like Turkish Airlines, that they can start coming to Zimbabwe. In Africa, we realized that there's no direct flight or connectivity from West Africa to Zimbabwe. We're trying to work on airlines from that area as well, so that they can come fly Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls, by where it's located, it's located somewhere in between Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and Zambia. So it's an area where we've got a lot of tourist attraction in Southern Africa. So we are trying to target most of the connectivity. Like you've seen, we have encouraged connectivity between Victoria Falls and Cape Town. Most people visit Cape Town. So we're trying to encourage when people come to Cape Town, they proceed to Vic Falls and vice versa. Same applies to Botswana, Cameroon, and all that. So we're trying to encourage that kind of connectivity.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that's very interesting because it ties back to the previous presentation from Cape Town that mentioned the package deals, and it even ties back to what Manish was saying about bundling. Don't just look at your offering, whether it's as an airline or as an airport in isolation, but look at bundling it. How can you tag along with other developments and other destinations? How do you see that in Zambia? I know the Copper Belt is particularly probably more a business-oriented airport, servicing the mining industry. Is tourism a big driver for Lusaka?
Well, all airports are positioned for certain strategic passages. Lusaka obviously is the business and administrative hub. It combines tourism and also MICE, where you've got meetings, intensives, and conferences in Lusaka. So we also look at business travelers who come to do business with the country. It also has a lot of merchants. There's so many people that go out to China, that go to Dubai to buy merchants and come back. So it's really a combination of business, executive business, and also business merchants, and also a little bit of tourism. The Copperbelt Airport is basically positioned to service the mining sector, like you've said. So it will be mostly business people that are going to conduct business, but also we have a lot of expertise or expatriates who come to work in the mines, so they shuttle between countries, between South Africa, some as far as the Philippines or India. So there are all those movements that take place. Livingstone is in the tourist capital, Livingstone, so that is a purely tourist kind of market. So we're looking at tourist kind of passengers and targeting also leisure charter companies, probably Thomas Cook and the like. Our smallest airport in Mvula is also in the national park. That is also positioned for tourism. So it's a purely tourism kind of market we're looking at. Yeah.
So you mentioned you have a very clear idea of each airport, what market it's targeting. You also mentioned earlier the need for or perhaps a desire for a strong locally based carrier that can help you with your connectivity. Now looking at Rwanda, obviously you have a very strong local carrier. That I would imagine drives very much the strategy also behind your infrastructure development. Can you elaborate perhaps a bit more on how having such a carrier and how their strategy impacts on your infrastructure development, particularly for Bugesera? Do you have to take their fleet into account, for example? Is it something as simple, or is it about the markets they're targeting?
Yes, an airport without an airline is a massive pavement and big building. So you would certainly need the airline to make use of the airport. And the national carrier will be based in the new airport. For obvious reasons, because the capacity, the constraints that we are going through today do not serve well the expansion of the airline as a home base. And so these are businesses, be it an airport or an airline. And for every business, there is a risk. And like Sabina was informing us in a few minutes, for every business, there is a risk, but a calculated risk. And this is how we see it. We see it both the airline and the airport's infrastructure as businesses that are likely to meet risks. But that they are related. They are related. And they are going to enable other sectors to develop. But like the minister mentioned earlier in the morning about the MICE strategy, having an airline and having an airport will not make people come to your cities or your airports or fly your airline. We have to create other reasons that will make people fly. And that is what the MICE strategy is doing. So the two and the other sectors are related, be it the airline or the infrastructure, the airport. So we strongly believe the airline feeds into the airport, and the airport will ultimately feed into the airline, and subsequently the entire economy.
So there is a close collaboration, or at least a close interaction between the airline and the airport development, even for the Bugesera, I would imagine.
Yes, yeah.
Great. I have one final question for the three of you before I want to just give the people in the audience an opportunity to ask one or two questions. One of the challenges that I know a lot of African airports and African governments experiencing with infrastructure development is financing. Where do you get the money to build these expensive pieces of infrastructure, these big runways and terminal buildings? You mentioned the Bugesera is a PPP project. Could you briefly explain where the financing is coming from, how that came about to be a PPP?
The private partner has got 75%, and the government has got 25%. And they have been engaging with financiers globally. It basically comes from financial firms. The government will contribute 25%, and the private sector will contribute 75%.
And this was possible because the opportunity was interesting enough for private investors to see a return and to invest their private capital.
The way I see it, the business of aviation is not only driven by an airport and an airline. There must be an environment, first of all. An environment that allows that business to grow and flourish. And that's what our government has done. They are creating a business environment that would not only allow airlines to establish and operate, but also investors, like the private sector who would come and work with us. So our government has established an environment that encourages private sector and foreign investment into our economy.
I think it's great, and the fact that this project is coming off as a PPP is a testament to the success of that strategy. The developments in Zambia, could you briefly touch on how they were financed?
The developments in Zambia, in Lusaka and Copperbelt, were a turnkey project. And then the way it was crafted is the contractor comes with a financier. So the contractor was identified, but then they need to also identify a financier. So both projects, although being done by different contractors, are being funded by the Exim Bank of China. The airports, of course, will not afford to build such massive infrastructure. So the loans are guaranteed by the government of Zambia. And the motive behind really is we know that there's a value chain. If airports do well and they grow, there's so many value chains that also benefit economically. So it was these are loans from Exim Bank. The terminal building in Livingstone was financed from internal sources. We got some commercial loans, which some of them are still being paid at the moment.
Okay. So for Livingston, you said it came from budgetary finance from your own organization. For the other two big developments, you found a way of finding the financing without having to cough up the money from your own budget. Yeah. Okay. For the Vic Falls development, how was this arranged?
Vic Falls was also financed by China Exim Bank through a concessional loan from the government of China through Exim Bank. However, we have targeted a few projects in the Civil Aviation Authority of Zimbabwe that will be constructed through PPPs. That is the hotel at Victoria Falls, the hotel in Harare, and we intend to construct a cargo terminal at Harare International Airport.
Also on a PPP basis?
Also on a PPP basis.
Great, great. So I think we have some of the most common, or three of the most common financing forms in Africa right here. We have budgetary finance from the Aviation Authority. We have development loans from international financing institutions, and we have the PPP model. Are there any questions in the audience? Or is everybody eager to get to lunch? I'm sure you can find our delegates as well, or our panelists as well at the lunch table. So if you have any more questions for them, then feel free to chat to them. If there's nothing here, then I would like to thank my panelists for their participation. Thanks very much.